Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This program is a basic introduction to the series, and we'll also learn about equipment. So you want to be a rock and roll star? Well, here's where it all begins. Your instrument, your pickup, your amp. I don't care if you play guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, or even zither. You can never know too much about equipment. To this day, I'll walk into a music store and get dazzled by some hot new instrument or effect, and I'll take it home and discover that it's kind of a weak, wimped out version of something that I already have. If that kind of thing happens to me after 38 years as a musician, you don't have a chance, right? Wrong. You'll have a better chance of dealing with that kind of thing after watching this program. You'll see how a guitar is actually made. You'll hear tips from super guitarist Gary Moore. You'll watch Rock School's resident drummer Jeff Nichols as he demonstrates heads, pedals, and cymbals. Lots of cymbals. And also be sure to watch for a clip of my good friend Stanley Clark on bass. There goes the bell. It's time for Rock School.
If you've been in a band for years, or you're just thinking of forming your first band, then Rock School is for you. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to be looking at how the guitar, the bass and the drums work together in a band context, and we're going to be looking at the styles of blues, rock, heavy metal, funk and reggae.
A lot of the musical ideas we're going to show you can be found in books, but what books can't show you is how the individual instruments fit together to produce the overall sound, and that's what Rock School sets out to do.
Not only will we be working out ideas here in the studio, we'll be looking at clips of bands in concert. We went out and interviewed one or two faces. They might be familiar to you. Here's somebody talking about how they started to play bass guitar.
I didn't actually start playing bass until Roger joined, and I was so, into playing with him. It was, a feeling that I'd never felt before. That was what really made me decide. At one point when Roger was drumming, I was like playing guitar on one number and then playing bass on another one. But if you'd heard me play guitar, you'd know why I changed to bass.
When forming a band, the most important thing is to have a good sound, and this depends on two things: your equipment and you.
So let's begin by looking at the hardware. How will the gear shape your sound?
First of all, the guitar. Just over 30 years ago, electric solid-body guitars were developed, and for a while they were marketed almost exclusively by two American companies, Fender and Gibson. Now, we went to find out what makes up the components of their guitars.
This is one of many types of bodies. This particular one will be slated for a Les Paul. You have two different types of wood incorporated into one body. The maple would more or less contribute to the brilliance, sustain, the high frequency, and the mahogany would relate more so to warmth, the basic character of the guitar tonality. So between the two, this produces quite a unique sound.
This is the Les Paul, okay. This is a much sort of longer sustaining kind of a sound.
Another significant portion of the magic formula, so to speak, and commonly these little items have been referred to as pickups, because in essence that's what they basically do. They pick up a signal. This particular pickup, which is called the humbucking pickup, was developed in the late 50s and essentially took one of these single coils, which is a single piece of plastic with wire on it, and took two of them, placed them side by side, the North Pole, South Pole, if you will, and actually they're trying to cancel each other, so to speak. Humbucking basically means just that. Humbucking pickups buck hum, or stop radiated noise or interference.
These are very powerful pickups because these were the original 1959 Gibson patent applied for as they're now in pickups. And they've got a lot of power in them, really. That's where you get that really long sort of sustain.
The hours that go into a neck would boggle your mind. The final sanding and contouring. The ellipse that's created is crucial to the feel that a person's going to have to work with. This fingerboard appears to be flat, but it's not. As you can see from the tail end, there's a curvature. And this particular curvature is a 1 foot radius. And that's critical to how the guitar will feel. This particular item we simply call a bridge. The basic function of a bridge is to adjust the height of the strings for easy playing, action, and as important, if not more important, it's designed to intonate the instrument. String gauges being what they are today, everything from bob wire to almost rubber bands, very slinky strings. You must have that ability to intonate the instrument. Once all these parts are put together, you've probably put 3 months worth of work into this instrument. And after finishing, it becomes almost human.
So the main components of the electric guitar are the neck, the bridge, the tuning heads, the body, and of course, the pickups.
Now, a pickup is basically a magnet with copper coils wound around. When a metal string vibrates, the signal is converted into electricity in the coil and sent along to the lead, and then from the lead it goes to the amplifier.
We've already seen how the Gibson Les Paul uses the distinctive sound of the humbucking pickup. That is, two single coils connected together. Now, Fender guitars are much more associated with single coil pickups. We asked Gary Moore to demonstrate the range of sounds that you can get from these guitars.
It's kind of like, if you play a Strat very quietly, it still gets very bright. It's not like a Les Paul where you tune it down and it gets kind of duller and duller. You can get a very sort of a funky sound, you know. Whereas the Les Paul, it's got more sort of a singing sound. There's some nice things you can do with a Stratocaster. You can get like a sort of a forky sort of a sound by putting the toggle switch between the pickup positions. Well, that's the old way of doing it, but now, of course, you have 5-way switches, but this is like one of the old ones, so that sort of Mark Knopfler type thing. Well, that sort of sound. And you can also get a very jazzy tone from it, if you like, you know. It's a much sort of mellower kind of sound. But the classic sort of Strat sound is really that sort of biting to that.
We've been looking at the design and development of electric guitars, and nowadays there's a whole range of good quality, cheaper models on the market. Now, if we have a look at one of these, this is very nice, but maybe we'll have a look at this one. No matter what price you're going to pay for a guitar, there are some features that you ought to look at. The first thing is to play the instrument. Make sure that all the notes are playing cleanly right up the neck. Check that there aren't any fret buzzers or rattles or things like this. perhaps you could notice the action. Now, the action is the height of the guitar strings above the fingerboard. If the action's too high, then you'll find that fretting notes and barring chords higher up the neck is actually extremely difficult. You ought to notice as well, if the guitar's staying in tune, it's possible that the strings are new in it, so you can stretch them like this. If the strings keep slipping out of tune, you want to check that the machine heads aren't actually slipping. This could be quite an expensive thing to correct. Another thing connected with tuning is intonation. The guitar should be in tune the whole way up the neck. Now, the way to check this is to play a harmonic on the 12th fret like this, and then fret the note, like this and this. Now, these two notes should sound exactly the same. If they're not, then check to see that you can actually adjust the string length by moving the bridge saddles backwards and forwards. If you find that you have got buzzers or rattles or things like this, if the intonation is inaccurate, then look down the neck to make sure that you haven't got a warped or distorted neck. Now, if you look down the neck, you can see that all the frets should be smooth. Run your hands down each side to check this. The neck should look fairly straight, with possibly a very slight concave dip in the middle, like that. And finally, of course, you should check all the controls are working, try out the tone, the volume, the knobs, you know, everything. Click all the switches so that when you buy a guitar, you know exactly what range of sounds that you can get from the instrument.
Moving on now to the bass guitar, the main developments lie with the pickups and with active circuitry. Now, the bass sound is probably the hardest sound to get right on stage because the bass frequencies are usually covered up by other instruments. But now, with the addition of actives and preamps inside the guitar, it's possible to go from a low, deep bass to a high, biting treble. One of the leading exponents for the use of the active is Stanley Clarke. Another development for the bass guitar has been the fretless. And with this, you'll notice the neck is different. It's no frets, it's like a double bass, which enables you to hold notes for a long time, like this. It also enables you to slur notes. Along with the fretless, you can use effects like chorus pedals and phase pedals. Now, the leading exponent of the fretless bass is Jaco Pastorius, and the sort of lines that he thought of are now used in the music of Paul Young, Nick Hayward, Japan, and the Police. We're going to incorporate some of those sounds in this next piece of music. 1, 2. The guitar or bass that you choose is only half the story. The other half lies with the amp. An amplifier is a pretty sophisticated piece of machinery, but there are basically two types: valve and transistor, and two basic setups: combo or stack.
Now, the first that we've got here is a valve combo. This is the classic Vox AC30, as used by groups like the Shadows and the Beatles in the early 60s. However, groups began to play in much larger venues. They needed more power. So the 4x12 speaker cabinet was developed, and amp stacks like this Marshall became very prominent, used originally by guitarists like Pete Townsend, later on by Jimi Hendrix. Then manufacturers began to develop the transistorized amp. This was compact, light, relatively cheap to produce, and it gave a very good clean sound. However, some guitarists complained of the earlier models that you couldn't really get that warm sound that was associated with the overdriven valve amp. Anyway, they've kept working on the transistorized amps, and this is a modern transistorized combo. It's very versatile, and notice once again we've come back to combos. This is because PAs now are very powerful, efficient. You don't need to project your sound to the back of a large hall. The PA will do it for you.
Having got these two out of the way, we get to the drums. The oldest and noblest of musical instruments. People have got some very funny ideas about the drums. I think they forget just how subtle and expressive they can be. So, let's have a closer look at the kit. The basic kit is divided into 4 areas. We have the drums themselves, and we have the skins that go on the drums, and these we call heads. Then we have the cymbals, and we have the hardware and pedals. Now, starting with the drums, these are traditionally made from varying numbers of plies of hardwood. Maple, birch, mahogany are all commonly used. And the different manufacturers have worked out different ways of ensuring the perfect roundness of the shell, which is vital to the projection and the sound. The bass drum, this forms the foundation of the kit. The tom-toms, they range right from little 6-inch ones up here, right through to 16-inch, 18-inch, even bigger down this end. The snare drum, this is central to the kit, and we'll be having a close look at that in a moment. Next we come to the heads. These are plastic. The reason they're plastic is because it's much stronger than animal skin, it's more uniform, and it's not affected so much by temperature and humidity. Next we come to the cymbals. Low down here we tend to have the ride cymbals. They're called ride cymbals because you can play rhythms on them like this. As you can hear on this ride cymbal, there's a bell in the centre. And then the hi-hat, again you can play rhythms on them. Higher up we tend to have crash cymbals, which have different weights and sizes, fast crashes. And then again we can have more colourful cymbals like this Chinese one over here. And you can also play ride patterns on this. Finally we come to the hardware. The important thing about this is that it should be really strong and not move, and you should be able to position everything exactly where you want it. And 2 important bits of hardware, the bass drum pedal, which can have a hard wood or a hard felt beater on it, and the hi-hat pedal. The hi-hats are a horizontally mounted pair of cymbals, and the hi-hat pedal allows you to open and close them and get this sort of rhythm. Now let's have a closer look at the various components which make up the drum kit. The snare drum provides the backbone of the rhythm. It's basically just a shallow tom-tom. But, as you can see, it's got wire snares over the bottom here, which are tensioned via this straining device, so that you get this characteristic snare drum sound. Also, you notice, like in this classic old Ludwig of mine, it's a steel shell, which suits the sharpness of the attack. But, of course, you can have wooden shells, like this one here. The wood's obviously more mellow, and the deeper shell gives you a deeper sound. Then again, at the top end of the market, you can get a brass shell one like this. The brass has obviously got a particular resonance of its own. And then at the other end of the market, there's this remarkable new thing, which is actually a laminated paper shell, and it's got a pre-tuned head. And I can show you the difference in sound that the depth of a shell makes by lowering this onto the drum. So here, fairly deep sound as we go closer, higher, on the shell, a thin sound. Now then, moving on to heads, there's been enormous advances in here. These are all basically the same. They're double thickness laminates with an oil film in the middle like this, which has the effect of damping the head quite a lot. They're very popular with rock and funk players. These are probably a bit more familiar. This is an ordinary white head which comes in different weights and thicknesses. The thinner it is, the more resonant it is. And in the middle we have these which are very popular, the pinstripe and the black dot, or donut as it's sometimes called. This black dot again is a damping device, but it's still quite a lively head, there's still quite a lot of resonance coming through. The pinstripe is a little bit more damped, gives a nice blatty sort of funky sound. I like that a lot. Double thickness again. The fibre skin here is an attempt to sort of copy the old warmth of a natural animal skin. And finally, quick move over to the cymbals. Again, a bewildering variety on the market these days. Don't be overwhelmed though, because they're basically serving the same three functions. Crash cymbals for punctuations, right from small splashes like this, right through to different weights and sizes. For instance, this very heavy, almost gong-like crash here, which can be used as a ride as well. A thick one at the top here is almost like a bell. Moving down, we get to the exotic sorts, like these three Chinas. Again, a heavy one. Here, even small ones are coming now. Different sizes, different weights, different qualities. The same here. This is a China with sizzles in it, so you get a long sizzle sort of sound. And down the bottom here, we come to the ride cymbals, the third category. This is a very heavy ride, almost gong-like. And by contrast, we have what they call a flat ride, which has got no bell at all in the centre, so you get a very sticky sound, which is very nice, not so many overtones. I can't resist.
In a few seconds, you'll see how really versatile the resident Rock School teacher musicians are, so don't go away. And if you're serious about learning to play, stay tuned, and you'll find out how to get a really thorough home study package. It goes into much greater detail than a half-hour TV program possibly can. Now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying, more Rock School, please.
As a preview of the weeks to come, we're going to end this week by looking at 3 different musical styles, and we're each going to explain how we get sounds from our equipment. First of all, heavy metal. Now, I'm using a guitar this time with humbucking pickups on them, which, as you remember, Gary Moore says makes them much more sustained and more powerful. I'm also turning my amp up a lot louder. The guitar will overdrive the amp, and I could add a distortion pedal as well.
For rock, you want a punchy sound, so I've set the pickup in the middle, and I've got a lot of bass and a lot of middle. I'm going to hit the strings really hard.
The drums, big open sound, lots of cymbals, and you hit them hard. 1, 2, 3.
Now for funk, you can use the same tone, but you're going to hit it this time with the thumb. And you're going to pull with the strings. Now that's quite a trebly tone, so you can take off some of the treble by just hitting this little toy here, the chorus.
On the drums, a much tighter sound. Tight snare drum, tight hi-hat, and a heavy downbeat on the bass drum.
I switched back to using a guitar with single coil pickups because for funk you want the guitar to sound a lot more crisp and light. I've also set the pickups out of phase, and I'm going to use a chorus pedal to space the sound out a bit.
Finally, for a reggae type thing, I haven't got time to tune the toms down, so I'm going to use this Tim Marley and some rim clicks, and again a very tight hi-hat.
For reggae you want to get a sharp cutting guitar sound, so I've switched to the bridge, that is the treble pickup.
For bass, you want a heavy, heavy bass. So I'm putting the pickup on full bass, and I'm going to my amp, and I'm putting everything on full. No treble, just heavy bass.
Wait, Rock
Hi,
School.
my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. You'll be glad you tuned into this episode. It's about tuning. When you're playing with a band, you have two choices. You can sound big and full and rich, or you can sound little, limp, and weak. Now, who would choose to sound little, limp, and weak? Well, every band that doesn't take the time to properly, and I mean properly, tune immediately before performance has decided to sound weak. And that's no matter how loud they choose to play. Now, an audience may not know that somebody in the band is out of tune. They'll just know that the band sounds a little funny. This session of Rock School on tuning is really to show you about how not to sound a little funny. I think it's pretty important. After we see John Entwistle of The Who, we'll hear from Wilko Johnson of the British band Dr. Feelgood, Ian Pace of Deep Purple, plus funk master Bootsy Collins, reggae drummer Sly Dunbar, and one of my favorite record producers, Bernard Edwards. Rock School is now in session.
I mean, I came out of the Middlesex Schools Orchestra with perfect pitch, and then went into a band that tuned to a harmonica, and it drove me crazy for years. I mean, I always felt that we sounded out of tune. Eventually, it disappeared. You know, it was forced out. And now if you told me to sing an A, I'd go, A.
Well, as you might have guessed, this week we're going to be talking about tuning.
Tuning is a problem that every band has to face. It concerns every instrument, not least the drums. The drums have a very wide range of pitches.
But first, we're going to start looking at the guitar and bass. And the vital components with tuning on these instruments are the strings.
Now, string pitch is determined by the length of the string, by the thickness of the string, and also by the tension. Now, on guitar and on bass, the length of the string is predetermined. It doesn't alter. So the only variables are the thickness and the tension.
So, the thicker the string, the lower the pitch. On the guitar, the thickest, heaviest string gives you the lowest note, like this. And the lightest, thinnest string gives you the highest note, like this. Now, the thickness or the diameter of the strings is usually referred to as the gauge, and you buy your strings in sets. Now, whether you use a heavy set or a light set of strings will depend on your personal choice and the kind of role that you play in the band.
The strings I use are, I think, a little heavier than most people use. And I like the action high-ish. You see, I don't go for playing 6 million notes very fast, and so I don't want the action right down. It's more for the sound. The gauge of strings you use should be really the heaviest you can manage to do what you want to do with, because the heavier a string is, the better the sound you're going to get from it. It gives a louder and a truer note if it's a tighter, heavier string.
So, as Wilko says, a heavier gauge of strings will give you a louder, truer note. You'll find you'll get a bit more sustain, and they'll stay in tune a bit longer. The advantage of a lighter gauge is that vibrato and string bending will be a lot easier. So really, you've got to make the choice.
You can get different gauges of bass strings too, but bass players are more concerned with the type of string they use. Now, all bass strings are wound, but the difference is basically in the binding. There are 3 types. There's round wound, flat wound, and ground wound. For round wound strings, there's a central plain core which has rounded wire wrapped around it. They give a bright sound and a touch more sustain. Flat wound strings have the same plain core but with a flat metal tape wrapped around it. They give you a punchier, more middly tone. Ground wounds are a combination of the two, being round wound strings shaved down and polished to make them feel like flat wounds. We went out and asked a few bass players what sort of strings they preferred and why.
I used to use flat wound strings when I started off with Whitesnake because the middliness of them really poked through. They're very hard to play, so I sort of gave that a rest and found a compromise with more ground wound strings, which are like round wounds that have been shaved down a bit. So they don't have so much twang on the top, but they still got a fairly middly sound.
The round wounds, rough boys, you know, make you have to scuffle for it, you know. And you know, I don't know. It seems like they have a better tone. I don't know if they last too long, but you know, I mean, for the sound and roughness and you know, I like you know that kind of thing. You know, they get a real good sound out of it, especially on stage too, and in the studio.
I used flat wound on the first 2 albums, but after that I changed. Especially for the slapping sound, you get more, you know, you get a better sound, you get a more crisp sound, more pop, you know, when you're doing this type of stuff. You know, you get a better tone. With a flat, you know, with the flat wound, you get something like this. And it's not really as clear, you know. I really can't demonstrate it without having the actual strings here. But you like to have that you know, that pop there, that crisp sound like.
Once you've chosen the type of strings, you've got the problem of keeping them in tune. Now, on the guitar, the strings are usually tuned to the following notes. Starting with the lowest string, it's E, A, D, G, B, and E. The bass strings are the same as the bottom 4 strings of the guitar, but they're a lot lower in pitch, like this. E, A, D, and G. You can find these notes on a piano or on pitch pipes, or you can use one of these. This is an electronic tuner. It means that you can actually tune each string visually by looking at this gauge here and seeing exactly when you're in pitch. But probably the most popular method is still to tune the guitar to itself. Now, to do this, you need to get at least 1 string in tune, and then you use the 5th fret method, like this. If you're unsure about this, you'll find that lots of books will tell you how to do this.
Another way you can tune up is using the harmonic method. Now, a note played on the bass consists of a main note or a fundamental and overtones or harmonics, but you don't usually hear those when you play the main note. Now, the harmonics can be brought out using this technique. You place your finger above the fret, resting on the string, but make sure that you don't depress the string onto the fingerboard, and then you pluck with the right hand like this. And as you do that, make sure that you move your finger out of the way. And again. Now, you'll find that there are harmonics all over the bass, and I'll just show you. Now, the best place for harmonics are on the 5th fret, here, on the 7th fret, here, and on the 12th fret. Now, when you tune up, all you have to do is 5th fret harmonic on the E string is the same note as the 7th fret harmonic on the A string, like this. So play the 2 together. They should be perfectly in tune. Now you'll notice there's an oscillation because the strings are slightly out. As I tune up, the pitch gets closer, the oscillation stops.
Now, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is string voicings, because on the guitar and bass, you can play the same note, same pitch, but in different places on the fingerboard. But because the strings have got different qualities, they're different thicknesses, you'll find they give a slightly different sound. So if I play this phrase on the top strings like this, it's quite a bright trebly sound. I'll move to the lower strings like this. Hear that the sound is a little bit more bassy and perhaps a little richer. Now you can try and use this in your playing like this. So if you're listening to records and you learn to recognise the different string qualities, it means that you'll be able to figure out exactly where the guitarist is playing phrases.
By tuning your guitar or bass in this particular way, you've imposed a particular order of sounds. Now there's a reason for that, and understanding that reason will enable you to tune properly and also to play very well. So first of all, let's look at sounds. Two sounds played together creates harmony. Now the distance between sounds are described as intervals, and when two sounds are played at the same time, they're called harmonic intervals. Now when two sounds are played in the form of a melody, like this, that's called a melodic interval. Now the smallest interval on the bass is called a semitone, and it looks like this. The distance of a semitone is marked by 1 fret. Now the next smallest distance is a tone. That is marked by 2 frets, like that. Now listen to this sound. That interval is called an octave. Scales are ways of splitting the octave and using equal steps. The major scale has steps of tones and semitones. This is the pattern for a major scale. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. For a minor scale, this is the pattern. Tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, tone. Remember, for a major or minor scale, keep the pattern in your mind, and then you can repeat the pattern on different notes and in different keys.
However, we're not going to look anymore at scales now. We're going to show you now how intervals and scales are vital for building chords. Of course, you could learn thousands of chord shapes out of a book off by heart, but it's much more interesting if you understand how chords are formed. So we're going to look at 2 basic chord types, the major and the minor. Now, to form a major chord, we're going to go back to the major scale and number the notes from 1 to 8, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, to form a major chord, you take the first, the major third, and the fifth from the scale. Play them together like this. To form a minor chord, you do the same thing. You take the first, the minor third, that's the third from the minor scale, and the fifth. And you play the notes together to form a minor chord like this. Now notice when you play these 2 shapes that there's only 1 note different between them. The major chord has got a major third. It's that note there. The minor chord has got the minor third, and it's like the major third flattened by 1 semitone or 1 fret.
Drums have different voices too. And by recognising these different voices, you can copy licks off records and work out different patterns and so on. We'll be looking at this throughout the series. And in recent years, drummers have had access to more exotic sounds, like these rototoms. Or this timbali. Or even these syndromes. Now, to get the best out of the main kit requires very careful tuning. In fact, tensioning is probably a more accurate term, since most drummers don't tune to specific notes. So, when drummers talk about tuning, generally they're talking about the overall feel and sound of the drum when it's struck.
All you can say is when the drum pleases you when you hit it, it's in tune, because nobody can tell you a drum is out of tune. If the drum is fighting with itself, so that you've got a 2-head drum and the skins are actually mismatching, then you can tell that's out of tune. But whether you tune it high or you tune it slack, you know, if it's in tune and it sounds good to your ear, then don't ask for anything more. So to say how you tune it, what my preference is, I tune my snare drum very high. I like it to be sharp and positive, and I don't like a lot of duration on the note. The toms I like exactly the reverse. I like them deep, and I like an after note. So when you hit the drum, you get the initial tension of the impact, and then you get the roll off as the skin relaxes and comes back to its normal tension.
Unlike the guitar and the bass, tuning the drums is a very personal thing. Starting from scratch, it can take quite a long while, and it's one hell of a headache for a lot of drummers. But there are a few tips that might help, I think. Starting with these tom-toms, they can be single-headed, like these over here, which means there's a head on the top and nothing underneath. Or, like these over here, they can be double-headed with a head on the top and a head below. Okay, for tuning purposes, start with a single head, which is obviously a little bit easier. Okay, now we take everything off. Good idea to get a duster and clean all the bits of chewing gum and dead spiders from around the rim here. All sorts of stuff collects. And also it's a good idea to tighten up all these little bolts inside, because they do come loose with heavy playing. Right, take the head, put it onto the shell. Now we take the steel rim, face that over, and the bolts go into the nut boxes like this, and what I usually do is tune them, take them up, finger tight like this. So you take up this little 1/4 of an inch here until they're finger tight. Now I'll move over onto this one here, which we've got to finger tightness. As you can see, it's not tuned. So the next thing you do is you take the drum key and, working diagonally, give a turn on each key, working diagonally like this. What you're trying to do, of course, is to give the same number of turns on every one and bring it up to approximately the sort of feel that you like. So we get to something like, not too bad. Now we give it a fine tune. What I mean by this is you do, rather similar to what a classical timpanist does, you go clockwise round like this and tap about 1.5 inches, 2 inches away from the bolt as you go round, giving it a little turn until you've got the whole head in tune with itself. This is what you're trying to do, trying to get even tension all the way over. If you do that, you'll find that you'll get a much cleaner and more penetrating sound out of the drum. Having done that, there are all sorts of tricks that drummers use, like slackening this one off a 1/4 turn. That gets rid of a bit of the extra ring, gives it a slightly funkier sound. But basically, you're after even tension. Now, moving on to the double-headed toms, a bit more complicated, obviously. There are 3 possibilities. You can have the top head a little bit slacker than the bottom head. You can have the top head a little bit more taut than the bottom head. Or you can have them both the same. Now, that last possibility isn't usually recommended because it rather defeats the purpose of having 2 heads on your drums. Also, you can run into tuning problems, a bit like we saw with the bass guitar. You can get oscillations between the 2 heads when they're almost in beats. You don't want that. So what most drummers do is tune the top head as we did this single-headed drum, get a nice feel on that, and then tune your bottom head up to give you the tone. So it's a sort of rule of thumb, top head feel, bottom head for tone. And it's probably true to say that more people have the bottom head a little bit higher than the other way around, but as I say, there are no rules. The other thing to be said about single head and double heads is that the single heads tend to give you a little bit more power because there's nothing stopping the sound from coming out of the bottom, whereas these, the sound goes backwards and forwards inside the shell, so you get a bit more tone. Okay. Moving on to the snare drum. The snare drum, in fact, is a shallow tom-tom, as you can hear. But, of course, it's got this wire snare stretched over the bottom. And it's got a transparent head on the bottom, as you can see, which is quite thin. So it doesn't take all that many turns to get it to quite a sort of pingy, quite a high sort of pingy sound. So that even though you've tuned your top fairly taut to get a nice crisp sound, the bottom usually will be a little bit higher than the top. One final thing to say about tension in drums is that, again, unlike the bass and the guitar, you may have to adjust according to the acoustics of the room or the studio or whatever, so don't be afraid to experiment. Now then, we've got them all tensioned nicely. You may still have to put a bit of damping on because you might have a bit of excessive ring. So traditionally the drum manufacturers had felt dampers which screwed up underneath the batter head like this. The problem with that, of course, is it impedes the downward movement when you strike it. And also, rock drummers have never been very keen on them because they're not really strong enough for rock playing. So, as you've probably noticed, external damping of some form or another is very often used. Usually takes the form of horrid bits of tape stuck over the edge of the skin like this. The effect it has is instead of this ring, you get a bit of it cut out. A bit more like that. In studios, damping is very common, but in fact, the range is enormous, as we found when we went and talked to a couple of drummers with very, very different styles.
Well, we put a lot of damping on the kit so we can get not directly dead sound, but almost dead, because we think it sounds better on the recording. Some people record with like it sounding live. For instance, this is dead, almost dead. This is like sound like a pan. We don't want to pan sound because no one really likes it. So put the dampers on. For the sound. So
damping, I try and use as little as possible. It's very easy to get away with virtually no damping on the smaller tom-toms. The bigger the drum gets, the more overtones you get, the longer the ring, and then you have to help a little bit and use some top head damping, but very, very gently, so that the damper only comes into effect once you've hit the drum.
Another factor is the type of stick that you use. This is entirely personal preference and, of course, the type of music you're playing. Sticks are usually made out of wood. Hickory and oak are the commonest. And when you're choosing a stick, especially if you're having to buy cheapish ones, always roll it on the counter like this, on the horizontal counter of the shop. If it's warped at all, you'll soon notice. Now, again, when we went out and asked some famous drummers about their stick preferences, we got some really revealing answers.
I'm not very fussy about drumsticks. So long as they're the right length, and for generally that's about 16 inches for me, and the right diameter, which I think is about 9/16 or 5/8, 9/16 I think, and the weight is right. I don't actually care what shape they are. In this situation, I'm using the sticks as they should be used, bead end out. On stage, I may say it's totally the reverse thing. Right? All I really need on stage is absolute power, and this probably gives me another 20 dB.
I find that this particular part here, the neck of the stick, is one of the most important parts, because this bit here, I don't like to have any gain, any whip or any movement there. And a lot of drums, I don't know if you can see that on camera, but that doesn't really move that much. And a lot of drumsticks you buy give a little there. When they give, they actually sound different. But this here is a little bit thicker than norm, and it feels very positive. I mean, when I play, I can feel down the drumstick it's a continuation of my arm, and it feels real good.
well, I use is Duraline 605. The Duraline is in my left hand, and I use it as a Regal to combo in the right hand. Two different sticks, two different size.
Why?
Because, for instance, you're playing like this, right? This part of the stick is much heavier, this part is lighter, right? So it's unbalanced. So what I do, I use a smaller stick, like the combo is much smaller than this. This combo is almost the size of here, so I have the two end being the same. And what I do is put some tape like this around here to balance back this end and cut off some of the notes of the hi-hat. So when you're playing, instead of getting, you don't get. So it's all glide with the music. And you have much more control over the hi-hat.
You know, I recently did an album with Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare. I had a great time, plus I learned a lot. Now, don't go away, because the Rock School Band's coming back to show you more. And if you're really serious about learning to play, keep watching for information on the Rock School Home Study Package. It goes into much greater detail than we can possibly do here. Now, for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying,
Rock on, Deirdre.
We're going to leave you this week with a number featuring the different voices of the drums and cymbals. Henry's going to play bass harmonics, and I'm going to play octaves in a slightly different way. So until next week.
Tonight at 9, 13 observes Martin Luther King's birthday with The Dream and the Drum, a tribute to one of our nation's most forceful leaders. That's tonight at 9.
Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This show is about how to get more out of doing less. It's on basic technique. Whether you want to be a great musician, a great singer, or even a great lover, first you got to master basic technique. I remember when I was starting out on keyboards, I'd play for a half hour, maybe an hour, and my fingers would start hurting. That was no fun, especially when I had about an hour or so to practice. The minute you get tired, and unless you really enjoy pain, you stop enjoying what you're doing, and more than likely, so does your audience. On the other hand, proper technique can allow you to get more power with less strain. Then, and only then, can you really get the full enjoyment out of your own performance. Today, you'll hear from some of the people who have mastered basic technique, including John Taylor of Duran Duran, who talks about playing with a plectrum. That's a pick in our language. John Entwistle of The Who, bass innovator Larry Graham with a super demonstration, plus words of wisdom from Robbie Shakespeare, producers Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers, and tying it all together, the sensational Rock School Band. Carl Palmer gets the ball rolling right about now.
I always think of the bass player playing right on the note. And I like to think of the drummer playing just in front of that, just to keep pushing it, just to keep the intensity there. And I always think of solo players, or solo instruments, melodic instruments, playing lead lines, or singers being the other side, behind the bass player. So there you have it covered. You have sort of your voice or your lead instrument sort of like giving the emotion, and they need a bit more space to get the emotion. You have the very methodic sort of bass sort of plodding away. Then on top of that, you have the excitement coming from the edge, you know, pushing it on, motoring it on as much as coming from the drummer.
Carl Palmer was talking about something of vital importance to anybody who's played in a band. The way the instruments fit together rhythmically.
Rhythm is obviously a vital part of rock music, but it's not just a matter of how fast or how slow you play. What you play on the drums will affect what the other instruments play, and this in turn affects the structure and arrangement of the whole of the music.
When you get into a band, you not only have to think about what to play, but when to play, because often what you don't play can be as important as what you do. But first of all, we're going to look at how to play, basic technique. Let's start with the drums.
Now, the sitting position. It's very important that you don't lean too far forward, don't lean too far backwards. It may sound obvious, but your weight must go straight down through the stool. This way, it leaves your arms, and in particular your legs, free and loose to play. Now then, starting with the right leg and the bass drum. First of all, the heel planted firmly on the base of the plate down here, and the fulcrum is at the ankle. You can play like this. Most rock drummers, however, lift the heel off the plate a bit to get more power, brings the whole leg into play. Don't come too far off the plate though. Do you get this? And for maximum power, you just bring it halfway down the pedal. Give it some real power. Now then, the third method is to combine those two together. It's quite useful for certain boogie type things, like this one for instance. You get a sort of a rocking motion. The hi-hat, same sort of thing. You don't need as much power, of course, but you still can lift the heels off to get a nice balance between the 2 feet. Alternatively, you can rock it the same as the right foot. Onto the hands. 2 basic grips. First of all, the match grip, which is what most rock drummers use. In this one, the fulcrum is between the fleshy part of the thumb and the first joint here of the first finger. The other fingers wrap around the base. The stick is like an extension of the forearm, the palm face downwards. The stroke comes from a combination of fingers and the wrist, and for maximum power, the whole arm comes in. Now, the other grip is the traditional or orthodox grip. Now, in this one, this was developed by marching band drummers who tended to have the snare drum slung to one side. So they had to develop this rather unorthodox technique where the fulcrum is at the base of the thumb here, the other fingers wrap around again, and the stick goes between the second and the third finger like this. And you get a sort of a cross here between the thumb and the first joint. Now in this one, you want to turn the whole forearm so that you're going up and down in a vertical plane, in this plane. If the wrist turns this time, you get this sort of thing, which is exactly what you don't want. This is the orthodox grip, but it's still used by some of the world's most powerful drummers. So even though rock drummers tend to use this one, we asked Ian Pace and Carl Palmer what they thought about the grips.
I would say to anybody starting off that the match grip, which I think so many, well, maybe 95% of the rock drummers today play like this. I personally think this is a better way to play, mainly because the whole of the percussion family uses this particular grip. Timpani, vibraphone, glockenspiel, even tubular bells, you're playing that way.
When you consider that the orthodox grip only came through the fact that it was a military style for a man marching with a snare drum angled across his leg. I mean, it was impossible to play it like that, really. So that's they developed that style. On a modern drum kit, you don't actually set the drum like that. So what's the point in using it?
One thing you do have from this particular grip is there's a little bit of finger control which goes in there, which, you know, you can get this way, but I think there's a little more. There's some very well-known drummers who have actually made a lifetime sort of style out of like this finger technique.
But that's not the only thing that you can do on rock drums. Listen to this. Right, that was a selection of straight-ahead rock fills. Did you also know that they can be played separately as technical exercises called rudiments? Now then, very briefly, I played flams, 3 strokes, 4 strokes, and they're based on the primary rudiment, which is the single stroke roll. This is played simply like this, one hand after the other. The next one, double stroke roll, 2 beats on each hand, like this. If I mix the singles and doubles together, you probably hear the difference a bit better, like this, say. And so on. Now then, in fact, there are 26 standard rudiments and thousands of variations on them. You can find them in loads of drum tutors. It may sound a bit dry, but it's a bit like Deirdre and her guitar, say. Sometimes she might have to look in a book to find different chords, different scales she'd never think of for herself. Same thing can apply to the drums. Okay, for instance, to take the next important rudiment, the famous paradiddle. Now this one you probably wouldn't think of for yourself, but it's very important because it mixes singles with doubles in the closest possible pattern, in this fashion. That's just left, right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left, and so on. Now then, we asked Carl Palmer and Ian Pace to show us just what you can do with a simple pattern like that.
A couple of simple, for instances, with a paradiddle. One is just using a straight 4/4 tempo between, and putting the paradiddle between the bass drum and the snare drum. If you take a paradiddle being right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. So you take that between the snare drum and the bass drum, you get. You immediately have a rhythm, a patterned rhythm. Now, if you don't know a paradiddle, you've never worked that out in a million years. But it's so simple to do. You take the same thing, you can have an interesting paradiddle pattern between the bell of a cymbal and your snare drum. You take it up in tempo, you get the impression of a train going along. So, movement, you know, you get... You can do that all day long, and it's really impressive if you stick it in the right place. But if you don't know the notation of a paradiddle, then that's something you'd never actually work out by yourself.
If you play them slow or fast, there's a great difference in the sound. You know, the actual feeling in your hands is the same as the sound. You couldn't actually tell I was doing 2 with one or 1 with the other, you know, to the listener. And that's the object of them, really, to get each beat as even as possible. And then you can take that same thing and put it on the drum set. You can actually play paradiddles on the drum set, and they would sound, they'd sound like this.
Moving on now to the bass and guitar, we're going to look at left and right hand techniques. These are probably even more important for shaping your sounds than either the instrument or the amp that you're using.
Now on bass guitar, the right hand is probably most important for shaping your sound. Let's look at the classic playing position. The thumb is on the back pickup and the weight is actually balanced on the back of the bass. So your thumb firmly in position and then you use your first and second finger to play on the strings like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now you'll notice that the strings are ringing and you have to stop that, so you bring in your left hand. The left hand controls the unwanted noise. So this time, damping goes like this. 1, 2. Notice how I bring my hand round as I move across the strings. Can you see that? Now, without even altering your amp or your pickup selection, you can get a wide variety of tones. All you have to do is move your fingers and play on different parts of the string. At the back, you get a hard, biting tone, like this. In the middle, you get a really punchy sound. And at the front of the bass, you get a real bassy sound. Now, as an alternative to those ways of playing, you can use a plectrum as a guitar player would do. That is absolutely fantastic for sort of boogie, hard driving rhythms. Sounds like this. Now, there are probably as many different right-hand styles as there are bass players, so we went out and asked a few how they did it. Notice the variety of different tones they managed to get, purely by the way they attacked the note.
I never intended to play with the plectrum, apart from as he picks up his Duran Duran plectrum. The first single was Planet Earth, which was just, what is it? I'll do that again. And I simply just couldn't play that, you know, at that pace with my fingers, at least not yet anyway. And apart from that, it was the only time I ever used a plectrum. It's not snobbery or anything, it suits some players. You know, I saw Thin Lizzy the other night, and I mean, Lynyrd, it would just not work for a band like Thin Lizzy, you know, with a finger style. But I felt for us, I wanted a very... I don't like the actual click that you get on the strings when it takes away from the actual note itself. At least when you hit a... all you get is the bass note. You know, you don't get any percussion sound off your fingers.
So this finger, like, can't get that sound from that note. Can't get it heavier. Can't get it lighter. Can't get it much deader. You know, same note.
Do you use your thumb?
Yeah, depends on the sound. Like the thumb, if I want like a dead sound, right? And if I want just like if I want a deep note, a lighter note, right? So you know, it just depends on how I move my hand.
I find my right hand changes position at least probably about 10 times during a song, just to get different effects and different sort of playing styles.
bass, then a lot of the sound comes from the right hand. With the guitar, though the right hand is very important, it's often the left hand that does most to control the sound. So we talked to some guitarists about their left-hand styles.
When you're playing the chord, you don't actually press the strings firmly onto the fretboard as to cause a sound that will, you know, you'll hear every note in the chord, like, you wouldn't, you know, hear that. You'd hold that chord by just resting your hand above, you know, the position of that chord and just hitting it. So it sounds, you know, but you can still make out that there's a chord there, but it's being muffled.
The way I like to hear a guitar is as part of a group, as part of a rhythm thing, and I think the guitar can emphasise and enhance things in a lot of the ways that a drummer can. I mean, this way of playing is very percussive, so that instead of just chords like that, the whole thing is like is cutting them off nice and snappy, so that you hit a chord, and then if you just lift your fingers so that they're damping the strings instead of making the notes, you get that. So you can vary between chords that are held on for a while or immediately stop like that to give it emphasis.
So let's look now at the guitar right hand, and first of all at plectrum technique. The usual way of holding the plectrum is between the thumb and the first finger. You can use either downstrokes like this, or upstrokes. But the most effective way of building up your speed is to use alternate up and down strokes like this. Now, I was keeping my wrist quite relaxed, and most of the movement was coming just from the wrist. If I was playing chords, I'd probably rotate the wrist and forearm as well. The thing to remember not to do is to tense your wrist up and move from the elbow like that. This is a way of slowing you down, and also you won't be able to get such a smooth plectrum technique. Now, you can also use the plectrum to control the volume, simply by deciding how hard to strike the strings, something like this. The last right hand technique I'm going to look at is damping. To dampen the strings with the right hand, put the side of the hand just on the bridge saddles like that. This leaves your fingers free to pick the strings still, and you can use this technique either to get quite a chunky chord sound like this, or if you want to play single notes and get quite a percussive sound, something like this. So you can see that right-hand damping is important in all styles of music.
But let's return to the point raised by Carl Palmer at the beginning of the programme. How do the instruments in your band fit together rhythmically? We'll start with the drums, the most obvious rhythm instrument. Right, well, the main job of the drums, obviously, is to state the rhythm of the song. And a rhythm we define as a regularly repeated pattern in time. In music, time is divided into units called bars, and in rock, most bars are divided into pulses, 4 pulses, called beats, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Bar 1,
2, 3, 4.
bar 2,
2, 3, 4.
bar 3,
2, 3, 4.
bar 4.
2, 3, 4.
A bar, an even amount of time, split into 4 even pulses called quarter beats. You can take that same bar and split it into 8 even sections. It would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can split your bar into 2, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we've got a rock beat. Let's add the band to that.
Right, I'm sure you all recognise that as the Bo Diddley rhythm, but in fact it comes from the Cuban clave rhythm, which is a pattern that crops up all over the place in rock. Now, so far we've been talking in 2s, 4s and 8s, but the first measure of the clave rhythm is an odd pattern. and the accents fall on the 1st, 4th and 7th of my hi-hat 8th beats, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, these odd accents are called syncopations, and it's syncopation that can really make a rhythm drive. The other half of the clave pattern is an even pattern, which seems to answer the instability set up by the first half. Now, this question and answer, call and response, is a common feature in all of rock music, and we'll come back to it again and again in this series.
Now, when it comes to playing together as a band, one idea might be for the bass and the guitar to fit in with the rhythm that's being laid down by the drums. Perhaps the bass can fit in really tight with the bass drum, like this.
While the guitar could match the snare pattern like this. Or I could switch and match the hi-hat pattern, something like this.
To add colour, if the drums does a fill or plays an accent, it sounds great for the guitar and the bass to go with it. Something like this. But whatever the style of music, there's a rule of thumb that applies to all of them. We asked Larry Graham to explain for us.
Well, actually, it depends. It depends on how complicated you're trying to get. If you're really trying to keep it simple, okay, then if the guitarist is playing a real complicated pattern, then I look for simplicity, okay? And another thing that's really important too, I must say, if there's a vocal involved, then we both should be pretty simple and let the vocal stand out in front until we go to the bridge or until somebody starts to take a solo, then we can stretch out, so to speak. But basically, if he's playing a complicated riff, say like in the key of E, I'd find something pretty simple, like play a riff in the key of E, Tony. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Like a simple. So I found the simplest thing I could find to lock that down right there. See, then if the drums would have came in, the drums, pop, 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 right there. See, so really, since he's starting now, by the same token, if I started something real complicated, then he'd try to find something simple to play. You know, maybe so I took the lead that time, see, and we just kind of like traded roles.
It sounds obvious, doesn't it? But getting your band to mesh together is really a matter of trial and error and practice. It might help to think of yourselves as a team. Even though you might be the best player, it won't necessarily make a good team. Let's look now at the way that Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards organise things in Chic.
You got to complement each other. I mean, if you're going to go in, you can create things where you're fighting each other or you go against the groove or things like that for a moment. But for the basic dance thing or listening, it sounds better when everything kind of sounds like it's flowing along together.
I guess that's why they call it a rhythm section. It's basically four people playing together to make a rhythm pattern that sounds like one overall rhythm pattern instead of four distinctly different patterns.
I had the good fortune to have worked with Nile Rodgers on the Mick Jagger solo album, and I don't mind admitting that I learned a thing or two from the man. Now don't go away, because the Rock School Band is coming back right after I remind you serious students out there that in a moment you'll get information on the Rock School Home Study Package. It goes into much greater detail than a half-hour TV program possibly can. Now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying,
Rock and roll, rock and roll.
Wait! Rock School's not over. Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This episode is about a kind of music that can't simply be defined with words, because it deals with a whole range of human emotions. It's called the blues. Now, this is the ancient Oriental game of Go, and it reminds me of the form of music that we in the 20th century have come to call the blues. Go is supposed to be the easiest game in the world to learn. As a matter of fact, somebody could teach you the rules in about 2 minutes, and you could start playing immediately. But mastering it, that's a whole different story. You could devote a whole lifetime to this game and still get blown away by a talented Go master. And so it is with the blues. The easiest form of music to learn, perhaps the most difficult to master. Today's show on the blues will attempt to make this ancient musical form considerably less inscrutable. We'll see blues master guitarist, and I mean guitarist with a capital G, B.B. King. Producer Nile Rodgers will talk about different types of blues. We'll hear from guitarists Chet Atkins and Wilco Johnson. We'll get the British blues from Status Quo, and before they even say a word, our Rock School regulars will establish their credentials as a first-rate blues band. Take it away, Rock School.
That must be one of the most instantly recognisable sounds in rock music, the bars of a slow blues sequence.
Rock music vocabulary begins with the blues, not only because it initiated two major styles, rock and roll and rhythm and blues, but also because it permeates just about everything that you hear in rock today.
Now, whatever the sort of music you play, it's worth your while to have a good look at blues, and we're going to spend the next half hour just doing that. We're going to look at the way it's been put together, and we're going to look at the way that blues has been a major influence on rock all around the world.
The power of the blues lies with the emotions that the music unlocks, and this is due to a musical tension and resolution. There are three areas of tension and resolution. The first one is the solo voice, which is a vital feature of this style of music.
The second is the chord structure and the bass lines that go with it.
And the third is the development of the rhythm patterns.
Originally, of course, blues grew out of the slavery of black people in southern United States. It was just a vocal style of music. There were no rhythm patterns or backings. This followed on from an earlier vocal tradition of African music. When backings were devised, it was the guitar that seemed ideal to match the expressiveness of the vocals. Now, there are two elements to this. One is the notes that are used, and the other thing is the techniques that you can use to give these notes expression. Now, the notes are very simple. There are just 5 different notes in any key, and we call these the blues scale. Now, I'm going to show you all the examples in blues scale patterns in the key of A. This is a very popular key in blues. So I start with the A note on the 6th string, and this is how it sounds. Now, let's extend the 1 octave blues scale up another octave. So I'm going to play the same notes, starting on the note of A. Now I'm going to play the whole 2 octave blues scale. But of course on the guitar you can play notes in different positions, so you can play the blues scale in different patterns. Now guitarists usually call these box patterns. Now the 2 octave blues scale we've just been looking at is usually the first box pattern that you learn. The second one is like an extension of that blues scale. So again in A it would start here on the 3rd string. And the 3rd box position has its root note on the 5th string. And again, it's a completed blues scale, going up to nearly 2 octaves. Once you've learnt these patterns and you can join them together, it means you can jam for hours. Now, we're going to look now at a great blues guitarist, the late Freddie King. Now, he's just using the 5 notes of the blues scale mainly, and in just 1 box position here. We never think it to listen to him. Now that sound is so powerful because of the tension between the minor nature of the blues scale and the major feel on the backing, particularly on the keyboards. But of course it wasn't just the notes that Freddie was playing or the box position he was using, it was the way he played them. And we're going to look now at some techniques you can use to make the notes more expressive. Now probably in playing blues the 2 most important techniques are vibrato and string bending. They're usually used in conjunction with each other, but I'm going to look at them separately so you can see exactly how they're done. Let's look at vibrato first. Now if I fret a string, a note in the blues scale, you'll notice that my hand position is different than usual. I've got my thumb much further up and the neck is really lined between my first finger and my thumb. Now to get a slow, even vibrato, you need to move the string from side to side of where it would usually lie, so you're shifting the pitch of the note up and back down again. It sounds like this. Or faster. This gives the note a lot more sustain than usual. And we'll try this now out with the group and you can see how this sounds, just using the notes from the blues scale. technique we're going to look at is string bending. Now, on the guitar, you can bend a string anything from a semitone right up to 2 tones. On the blues scale, there are 2 notes in the scale that are most commonly bent. It's the 4th, which in A, it would start here on the 3rd string. And this note is usually bent up a tone, so from here to here. And you also bend up the 7th note, which is this note here. And this is bent up a tone as well, so from this sound to here. Now I'm going to bend the string. I'm actually gripping the neck with my hand, and I'm going to use the same technique as with vibrato, that is to rotate the wrist so that my whole hand will move. And I'm going to use my 3rd finger to bend both these notes like this. And the 7th note. Now I'm going to incorporate both the techniques now, string bending and vibrato, and I'm also going to slide the notes a bit, because these are all techniques which will make the blues scale sound a lot more expressive. Guitarists use these techniques generally to imitate the power and expressiveness of the vocals, and this approach to rock soloing has become very popular through guitarists like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, who brought the blues to a much wider audience in Britain in the 1960s. We're now going to look at a clip of a guitarist who influenced them and who has spent a lifetime trying to make his guitar literally sing. This is the incomparable B.B. King. Now the last part of the blues is the chord structure. This came originally from various forms of white folk music, and at its simplest consists of 3 chords played over a 12-bar pattern. Now these chords are often called the 1, 4 and 5, and to find out how they got their name, we've got to go back and look at the A major scale. Now if I play the major chord on the 1st note of a major scale, I get the chord of A major. If I play a major chord with the 4th note of the scale as its root, I get a D major. Now this is called the 4 chord. If I play a major chord with the 5th note of the A major scale as its root, this is E major, and this is called the 5 chord. So far in the series we've looked at major and minor chords, but we've yet to look at 7 chords, which are actually a very important part of blues guitar. Now to form a 7th chord, you take a major triad, which is the 1st, 3rd and 5th note. In A it'd be this, and add on a flattened 7th. Now, in the 1, 4, 5 sequence, the 5th chord is nearly always played as a 7th. So let's look again at the 1, 4, 5 in A, 1 chord, A major, 4 chord, D major, the 5 chords, this time it's E7th. And you can hear that this chord sound produces a sort of tension which is resolved by going back to the 1 chord, the A major.
Now chords can be very useful when you make up bass lines. Now even if you've only been playing for 5 minutes, you can still have a go. First thing you do is find out the low strings of the guitar chord, because they're exactly the same as on the bass. Deirdre's playing an A chord, and so you find your A position, which is here, on the E string, and then you follow the root of the chords, like this. A, then D, then E, then D, and then A. Now all you've got to do with your one finger is add a bit of rhythm, so we'll get some rhythm from Jeff. Right, now the next step is to find out what's in the guitar chords. There's a root, a third, and a fifth. Root, third, fifth. Against the chord, they sound like this. And then you remember the finger shape that you've got and copy that when you move to your new root on a D, like this. 1, 2. That's for D, and then you can copy the same finger shape and play E major like this. Now let's add 2 more notes to that. Let's take the 6th in a scale and the 7th in a scale and add those 2 notes to the chord. So now we've got root, third, 5th, 6th, 7th. Now if I play this in a 4/4, you'll recognize it as a walking bass line. Now the good thing about that pattern is that if you change the rhythm just a little bit and play it in unison with the guitar, you get some great rock and roll riffs. Right, so remember, learn a finger pattern for your chord, and then you can copy that pattern on any position, and you just, if you want to change the chord, you just do the same pattern, but make sure you've got the right root note.
When Henry was making up bass lines, he used the notes the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. Now, if we do that on the guitar, if we move in A, we move the note of 5th, 6th, and the flattened 7th against the root note A, we get this familiar pattern. You can also add notes to chords as well. For example, you could add a 4th to a major chord and get a suspension, quite dramatic. Or you could play a 9th chord, which has got a more jazzy sound. We're going to be looking in more detail at chords like this later on in rock school, but for the moment, we're going to look at 2 guitarists from quite different backgrounds. They both end up playing 3-chord blues, but because of the way they play the chords, they produce quite a different effect.
4 chords, I'm sorry. 3-chord blues. You know, you can put a lot of chords into blues. You can play all kinds of substitute changes and everything, like I did there.
You can have like sort of like rock blues, which is, you know, that kind of stuff, Chicago blues, or you can have jazz blues, things like
The third component of the blues, of course, is rhythm. But on the drums, as we saw last week, it's not just a matter of trying to be flash. Everything that you play here affects the arrangement and the structure of the whole of the rest of the music. And in fact, this can be shown historically, because when you go back to the very earliest blues and rock and roll, there were no drums. And when the first blues drummers in Chicago were drafted into the bands, people like O.D. Payne and Fred Bellow, they had all sorts of problems to contend with. Wandering time, 13 bars instead of 12. And eventually, they nailed the rhythm down, and they were very largely responsible for structuring the 12 bar as we know it today. Now, in early blues, there's a triplets feel running all the way through it, which gives it the sort of swing that is similar to jazz. So instead of the 4 beats of the bar being divided into 2 like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 2s, we get 4 3s. So you get 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. And it's played at different tempos in different sorts of music. And of course, different tempos means different moods. So we're going to have a look at a few different examples of what you might do on the drums, and we're also going to see how it affects what the other instruments play. So, starting with the slow blues again, in this, the bass drum follows pretty closely what the bass guitarist is doing. Not too closely though, otherwise it gets a bit stilted. You've got to develop some sort of communication feeling with your bass player. Also, the snare drum on 2 and 4, the guitar goes along with it, chops on the 2 and 4. So you get this sort of sound. Now, as the tempo picks up, we get into the area of shuffles and boogies. Now, if you're not playing too loud, one nice idea is you can shuffle with both hands together. In fact, the whole band can shuffle together, and you get this sort of thing. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and as we go up to really fast tempos, we get into the area of rockabilly. You can do this in a country manner like... For more interesting, you can play with both hands on the snare drum. Again, the guitar follows the snare drum beat. There's a beat like this one. Now, all these fields have got a triplets feel going through them. Whereas you saw last week, the other big influence on rock music is Latin. And this is most obviously shown by the straight 8ths beat on your hi-hat. So that instead of this, you get this. The other thing that comes from Latin, we talked about last week, the clave rhythm. We're going to do a bit of really classic rock and roll now. And the guitar lick that Deirdre's going to do, very much Chuck Berry influenced, in fact is based squarely on the clave. I'm sure you'll spot it. 1, 2, 3.
We hope to have shown you how flexible the blues structure is. No two guitarists will play a blues riff the same, so you can actually build up your own personal expression using the blues scale. And that's why it's so popular. Blues means something different to everybody. We're going to look now at a guitarist who's actually got quite an unusual style. This is Wilko Johnson, who came to fame with the London R&B band Dr. Feelgood.
Come on and get your guitar, Wilko.
Wilko seems to manage to play both leads and rhythm at the same time. He almost sounds like two guitarists. So we went and asked him about his style of guitar playing.
The chords I use are generally simplified shapes. This shape is familiar to most people, G. I play this way generally, which is the top 4 strings of that chord, they're like that, and I put my thumb over the top to make the G. And on the 5th string is in fact dampened by the thumb. The rhythm is sort of just, the right hand is just kind of doing this. With the back of my nails going downwards, and with the thumbnail on the upwards, so it's just going across there really, and then I kind of blend in this little riff here. So if I can do it slowed down, it just goes.
The blues is where most musicians start out, and it's the way we end up too, because the blues is in everything. Status Quo is next, so don't go away. And if you enjoyed this show and want to know more about the blues, keep watching, because coming up is information on the Rock School Home Study Package. It goes into much greater detail than we can on the show. And now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying, I got the blues.
We're going to end the programme with another British band who play blues-based music. The sequences are still 12 bars using the 1-4-5 chords. The lead lines come from the blues scale. This is Status Quo.
Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This program is a powerhouse. The subject, heavy metal. Seeing a young band playing heavy metal music takes me back to when I was first learning keyboards. You know, my parents were paying for my piano, of course, and my lessons. And they wanted me to play high-level, respectable classical music. And I, on the other hand, wasn't satisfied with music that was merely high-level and respectable. I wanted to play dirty, dissonant jazz. Well, every generation needs its own music, and I guess you can figure out who went out in my household. In this session of Rock School, you'll also see who went out in the households of Iron Maiden, Ian Pace of Deep Purple, Gary Moore, and watch for a vintage performance clip of the father of heavy metal, the great Jimi Hendrix, who single-handedly, sometimes with his teeth, turned feedback into an art form. Also, do check out our resident Rock School musicians dressed in leather, but it's just for this occasion. They'll demonstrate some valuable techniques that can make you appear to play faster than a speeding bullet. That's a little loud, and I hope nobody's ears are bleeding.
And that was one of the new bands at the forefront of heavy metal, Iron Maiden.
Originally known as heavy rock, heavy metal grew up in the late 60s when musicians started to look for new ways to expand their sound.
The music was blues-based, but they abandoned the 12-bar format in favour of open-ended riffs taken from notes in the blues scale.
The crossover between the blues, rock and roll tradition and heavy rock is perfectly illustrated in this next clip we've got of the great Jimi Hendrix. He's playing a Chuck Berry classic, Johnny Be Good, and he keeps pretty much the original until he gets to the solo. Hendrix was one of the most exciting and innovative rock musicians ever, and he helped change the sound of the guitar. So, how do you get a heavy rock sound? Well, the most important thing probably is volume, because you need to overdrive your amp. Guitarists started to overdrive stacks like these by turning up their amps, turning up the guitars to full volume, and they found they could get a lot of sustain and distortion. This is also helped by using a distortion pedal, or a fuzz box as they were then called. Nowadays you can get this kind of sound at a much lower volume if you want. I'm going to show you this kind of sound now in the studio, and with the feedback that I'll probably get from the chord, I'm going to control it using the tremolo arm and positioning the guitar to the amplifier. was volume. The next thing, of course, is the notes that you're going to use. And once again, it's the blues scale that supplies the notes for the soloing, obviously, but also for riffs, which are very important in HM, and also can give you ideas for chord sequences. We're going to look at riffs first, and I'm going to start off by playing a blues-type riff. Now, I'm going to use the key of E, so here's the E blues scale. So, a blues riff in E. Now I'm going to play exactly the same notes, but lower down on the guitar, and just listen to the kind of sound you can get. Now, the same principles apply to chords. You want to get quite a heavy chord sound, use the bottom strings, use downstrokes. This will give you more power. Now, you can play an A chord using these notes. An E chord like this. These chords are neither major or minor because they don't contain a third. Another chord which doesn't contain a third is the suspended fourth. Now, this is formed by taking a major chord, this is A major, and substituting a fourth note for the third. And back to the major. This sounds quite dramatic if you play it like this. Now, as I mentioned, the blues scale can also give you ideas for making up chord sequences. If you were playing in E, the notes of the blues scale would be E, G, A, B, D, and E. So, you can make up a chord sequence using chords based on these notes. It could sound like this. The next thing we're going to look at, of course, is soloing, because this is probably the way that the guitar is most associated in heavy metal. We're going to look at a right-hand technique first. Instead of picking the strings usually with just your plectrum, if you use the side of the thumb as well, you can actually get to sort of a lot of harmonics from the notes, like this. But of course, it's the left hand that does most work in heavy metal soloing. Last week in the blues, we looked at the techniques of string bending and vibrato. These are still important, but in heavy rock, the solos tend to be a lot more flashy and faster. So we're going to look at a couple of techniques now which can make you appear to play faster. Now, the first one is called hammer-on. Now, if you fret a string and then hammer on a second note without picking the string again, this is called a hammer-on, like this. Almost the reverse technique is called a pull-off. You would fret the note and then pull away with the finger like this. If you add the two techniques together, you can get trills, and they sound like this. These sound quite good on open strings, and you can play one-handed like this. Now I'm going to play a solo using these three techniques and also the string bending and vibrato that we did in the blues program. Now, effects can really enhance your sound, So we're going to look now at Gary Moore and see the kind of sounds he gets from his effects pedals. What Gary doesn't mention is that he's actually using an echo unit all the time as well.
This is the distortion which I use on the Stratocaster to fatten the sound up, and you'll hear the difference if I switch it on and off. This is with that. More powerful sound on this guitar because of the weakness of the pickups. This kind of makes up for it, boosts the output of the pickups, if you like. This is a chorus. It gives you a kind of a shimmering type effect. This is an octave divider, which brings in octaves below the note that you're playing. So this is one octave. This is a flanger, which is similar to a chorus, but gives more kind of a sweep. That's about it.
Now onto the kit. To match the volume of the guitar, you've got to go for power on the drums as well. And you notice this week we've got more drums, larger drums. We've got as little damping as we can get away with in the studio here. Snare drum, deep, but it's a metal shell to give you the edge. The sticks, heavy sticks. A lot of people use them the wrong way around as well, like this, give you even thicker sound. And the main thing, you've got to hit the drums hard, like this. Now, playing like that all night, you're in danger of damaging yourself. So a lot of drummers put elastoplast on the fingers, all sorts of tricks like that. And it's a good idea to use sweatbands, wristbands, always have a towel handy. And one final thing, have your crash cymbals up nice and high to give you plenty of room for powerful strokes.
Along with the drums, the bass is vitally important in heavy metal music because it provides the drive beneath everything and gives the music its weight and bottom. You can also do riffs in unison with the guitar and stabs and accents and play counter phrases and counter melodies. To start off with, we're going to look at 4 rhythms that crop up a lot in heavy rock.
First rhythm, good straight ahead rock and roll 4/4. Now in a rock band you'd probably play 8 to the bar on the hi-hat like this. Now in HM you make it heavier and more simple, so you end up playing 4 to the bar and the rest of the band goes with you like this. 2.
This sort of music is great for one-fingered bass players because as long as you get the rhythm right, you're going to sound pretty good. We're going to try another rhythm this time, an 8th note and 2 16th notes. It sounds like this. I call it the Red Indian rhythm, right? And we're going to try that with the band playing. Notice that the bass is playing exactly the same thing as the hi-hat.
Now triplet rhythms, they crop up in heavy rock as well, and the blues shuffle becomes the HM boogie. Again, you simplify it and the whole band locks together like this one. 2, 3.
Now for fast tempos, what you should try is getting the whole band to play 8th notes. We talked about 8th notes before. It'll sound like this. apart from the single note rhythms and phrases, you can play 2 notes, 3 notes, or a whole chord all at the same time. Start with a root note, and then a fifth. Or you could play root note, fifth, and octave. Or if you've got the strength, try and hold down a whole chord. Now you can strum it just like a guitar, and this is good for when the guitar is doing a solo, because you can fill in the sound. It'll sound something like this. And now, faster than the speed of light and heavier than a ton of bricks, Motorhead.
Right, HM arrangements. Here's one really dramatic trick. What you do, the bass and the drums accent stabs while the guitar plays consonant eights, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now in the quieter, more gentle moments, when the guitar is doing arpeggio figures, the bass and drums can play a counter melody with accents against that. It sounds something like this. And as a final idea, try learning to play a few blues licks, something as simple as this. Now try playing that with the guitar and with a heavy drum beat. So far, we've been talking about effects. Now we're going to try and put those all together in an arrangement. We're going to start off with a slow tempo, a Red Indian rhythm, with the guitar playing suspension chords, and then the guitar and bass are going to lock together in a heavy riff. And then the drums is going to play double tempo with a guitar solo, and then we're going to do fills, the bass, the guitar, and then the drums, and we're going to end the tune by playing in unison.
Okay, finally, onto drum solos. Now, you don't have to be brilliant to play a drum solo, though it does help. The main thing I want to get over is to think musically. For instance, ease yourself in playing a rock rhythm and just alternate 1 and 2 bar fills until you're into your solo, maybe like this. Okay, so now you've eased yourself in. I'm contracting like mad, but obviously you can take longer over it than that. Good thing to do is to keep your feet going. That way it keeps you in time, it keeps your audience in touch, and also it helps out a bit if you get into a bit of a mess. So, starting with the 2/4 hi-hat thing like this. Then you've got to bring it down, give yourself a bit of a breather. So what you do is change the sound, maybe play on the cymbal, show what a sensitive artiste we drummers are, you know, having had to play like an animal for the rest of the evening. Or what you can do is take the snare off and get a completely different sound and do a pattern like this, for instance. Next, put the snare back on and you've got to start building up. The easiest thing to do is to play 16s all over the kit, and you can get into sort of quite African sort of rhythms quite easily doing this sort of thing. And you can get a bit visual as well, because you can get into cross-hand patterns and opposing motion patterns like this. Remember, keep your feet going. Okay, you can go on with those sort of things and build them up. The next thing to do is to bring your bass drum in with the hand licks. For instance, you can get triplet things going, like this one, just by doing... and so on. Or you can use the old favourite, the 4-stroke rough. Okay, like that. Final thing you've got to do is get out of all this. So you've got to give the band a really strong cue, because if they don't come in right, you're going to blow all the hard work you've done up till now. So maybe you're doing a triplets thing, and you might be able to give them a cue like this one. Okay, now we're going to have a look at one of the first and best of the heavy rock soloists. Notice how he uses the hi-hat to keep the pulse going, but it's not just his technique, it's his whole musical approach that makes it work. This is Ian Pace.
You can only play flat out for so long before physically you go off. And you also turn the audience off, because once you've blown your cookies, that's it, there's no more left to give. Light and shade in volume especially, is really effective. If I'm thundering around the kit doing a very simple, I'll take a very simple triplet, and then I'll go down and do some fiddly things on the snare drum. The difference can make a solo. The fact that you've actually thought about going from loud to soft. That gives you, of course, that gives you the opportunity then to go back loud again. If you don't go soft, you've got nowhere to go. So I'll be fiddling around something like this. I'll be going... etc., whatever I think of doing next. Now, without that build-up, without the diminuendo, you have nowhere to go.
Some people criticize heavy metal because of its volume, but good music is good music. Now don't go away, because the Gary Moore Band is coming on right after I urge everyone who's really serious about learning to play to keep watching. Rock School is offering a home study package that digs into the subject a lot more than we can on the show. And now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying,
We're going to finish this week with the Gary Moore Band. See if you can recognise the power chords, the riffs, and the rhythms that the band are using.
Not many introverts in rock and roll, I don't think.
Wait! Rock School's not over. If you really...
Next on America's Musical Theater, Scott Joplin's joyous and rousing ragtime opera, Treemonisha, a story of superstition and enlightenment. A story that Joplin never lived to see performed. Don't miss the Houston Grand Opera's exciting revival of Scott Joplin's Treemonisha. Next time on America's Musical Theater.
Simulcast in stereo tonight at 10.
Newport Jazz 85, featuring Spyro Gyra, Stevie Ray Vaughan in Double Trouble, Dave Grusin and Lee Ritenour, Freddie Hubbard and the Festival All-Stars, the Dirty Dozen Brass Band, with a special appearance by B.B. King.
Simulcast in stereo Friday night at 10. Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and Dorothy Lamour take their show on the road to Zanzibar Friday night at 11.
The 13 presentation of Rock School is made possible by a grant from TDK Electronics Corporation, manufacturers of quality audio and video cassettes and floppy disks.
Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. On this show, you'll learn to slap, chop, pluck, and thump. It's all about funk. Right now, I've got a confession to make. Well, that was kind of meant to be a joke, but really, back in the 60s, I was what you might call kind of a jazz snob. It's not that I didn't like rock and roll or rhythm and blues, because that's the kind of music I grew up with. But by the 60s, I just wasn't paying much attention to anything but jazz. Not until a song by Sly and the Family Stone came on the radio. And just like that, I got completely turned around. That song, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, was the funkiest thing I ever heard at that time. Come to think of it, it still is. After seeing Family Stone bassist Larry Graham in this session of Rock School, I can appreciate why that song has such an impact on me. Also on this show, you're going to meet one of the cornerstones of funk music, Mr. Funkadelic himself, Bootsy Collins. Along with Ray Charles, James Brown, and Sly Stone, Bootsy has helped make funk a legitimate musical form. Also, Nile Rodgers, producer of Chic, Mick Jagger, and Madonna, will share some of his funk secrets with us. Let's not be late. There's a whole lot of funk going down.
Pause.
Hi, welcome to Rock School. Just listen a moment to the king of funk, Larry Graham. As bassist for Sly and the Family Stone in the 60s, and with his own group, Graham Central Station, Larry was an innovator in a style we now call funk. Along with Larry, we'll be talking to P-Funk all-star Bootsy Collins. And dance
music. But what can each instrument do to make the overall sound funky?
A heavy downbeat is real important, especially when you're playing music to dance by. If you give them the heavy downbeat, then there's no way they're going to get lost. For example, if the bass is given that heavy down with the bass drum and the snare drum carrying the backbeat, I mean, really the horns, the guitar, the keyboards could do practically anything else, and it will never get the dancer or the listener confused.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and you hit on the one, you know, one, you know. And then you would try to fit your different notes, what you felt in between that, like, you know, and that's the funk, you know, and you can change that, you know, it's however you feel, but you just have to fit it between that space, that little space that you got, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you know, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then you go back to your funk. Here you go, 1, and then you want to break it down, break down, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, and there you go. You got your basic funk formula there. You know, you can do anything you want to do with it, you know.
Okay, now obviously there are many variations to the funk formula, but basically on the drums, as Larry and Bootsy just said, we're talking about a solid 4/4 rhythm with the emphasis on the downbeat, i.e. the first beat of the bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now, here's a slightly slower feel, but notice again the emphasis on the first beat of the bar, and I'll fill it out a little bit more this time. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I filled around a little bit more then, but the thing to remember is that this is dance music. Don't overdo it. If you're going to fill, just do it between changing sections. Now, the other thing that you might have noticed in what we've done so far are the hi-hat snatches. The trick of this, you just open the hi-hat a little bit, catch it with the shoulder of the stick, and close it as fast as you can. Like this. Now, you may want to accent at the same time with the bass drum, in which case you get syncopations like this. I'll do it very slowly. The other classic way is a disco hi-hat. This is easier. You just play 4 to the bar with the left foot, catch the hi-hat on the an of each beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. You need a bit of independence to the right foot for this, so you can do this sort of rhythm. But to start with, all you need to do, 4 to the bar on both feet, and you get the classic hi-hat lick like this. 2, 3.
So let's look more now at the guitar role in funk. In this type of music, the guitar has really developed as a rhythmic and percussive instrument. So the sound is usually quite light and crisp. You could try pushing the pickups out of phase, or using a phase pedal or chorus pedal to space the sound out. So here's the sound without any effects. Try the chorus. And of course, guitarists have developed their own individual styles of playing. Let's look now at Tony Maiden and Nile Rodgers.
I use my index finger a lot, and along with, I use the pick occasionally, and combination with the thumb, you know, so it's like a, you know, I got this motion happening here.
So you're switching the
Yeah.
around.
It all depends on which lick I want to get into. Like I use the index for more rhythmic feel. I use the pick for like a lot of fucking for the single notes. There you have it.
And the thumb?
The thumb is more like a. It's a combination of the thumb and index. More like a Hawaiian little.
You can just make it interesting with the right hand by, matter of fact, Bernard showed me this, you could just take one chord and accentuate different notes in the chord without even moving. Just like this is a good example. You can go. Whatever. Now, most of the time, I'm only playing 2 and 3 notes at a time, you're hearing. Which is just. Same notes. But in the context of a song, you hit. It's a feeling thing, and you just practice over and over again, which is what I did. I used to just sit around and go. And then you just keep going. And I used to mock banjo rhythms, you know, just like, and just, you know, forever.
So, both those guitarists have got their own individual styles. But I'm going to show you 2 techniques which all guitarists will incorporate into their playing. The first one is often called the chop, and this produces quite a short chord sound. What you do is strike the strings with your right hand using either an upstroke or a downstroke like this. With your left hand, obviously you fret the chords, but then bring your fingers up quickly so that they're resting on the strings and dampening the strings. So this cuts the chord sound short, something like this. I'm going to play 4 regular chop strokes to the bar, but then I'm going to switch the rhythm. So listen and see if you can spot what I'm doing. Now I started off playing 4 strokes to the bar, but then I switched to playing 16 strokes to the bar, actually matching the hi-hat in this case. And this is the second technique we're going to look at. If you've heard that fast, syncopated, funky rhythm, this is a good way of doing it. Keep the right hand playing 16 strokes to the bar constantly, like this. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it's the left hand which selects which of the 16th notes to play and emphasize. You can build up rhythms like this. Now, you can practice these 2 techniques separately, but if you're in a band, you'll want to incorporate both techniques into your playing. Now, I'm going to demonstrate using both of them. I'm going to use the chords of E minor and A seventh. And you might have noticed that I'm just using the top strings. This produces a sharper sound, which is good for funk. And also, if you're just playing the top 3 strings, you've got much less distance to travel if you're playing fast rhythms. So I'll do it now with the band. At the end there was using chord inversions, which you'll remember is a way of playing the same chord in different positions. So E minor, here, and A seventh. And using this technique, you can actually change around the melody of the chords as well as playing the rhythm at the same time. Now, we'll go on to look a little bit more at chords, because often in funk, you'll find that there are more jazzy sounding and complex chords used. Now, if you remember, in the series so far, we've looked at major triads, minor triads, and seventh chords. If you add on notes from the major and minor scales onto these chords, then you can actually build up more complex chords in each of these groups. Remember how the scale is numbered from 1 to 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If the chords extend over the octave, the numbering will continue. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Of course, there's not time to look at all the chords you could form, so I'm just going to pick a couple to look at which are quite popular in funk. The first one is the minor seventh. This is a minor triad with a flattened seventh note added to it. I'm going to show you A minor seventh. First position, root note on the sixth string. So I'm going to bar across the fifth fret and add in this note here. This is an A minor seventh chord. The root note on the sixth string, and here's the flattened seventh note. There. Another position for this chord is with the root note on the fifth string. So I fret across at the 12th fret there at my first finger and add in these two notes here. Now here's the root note, the A, and here's the flattened seventh note, which in this case is a G note. Now then, this chord position is very good for funk because you can actually hammer on with these two notes and produce quite a percussive rhythm sound, something like this. Now the last chord I'm going to look at is the ninth chord. This is formed by taking a seventh chord and adding on a ninth note to it. Now this is one way of playing an A ninth chord. Bar the top three strings with your third finger, first finger here, second finger there. Now this is an A ninth, so this is the root, the A note, and here's the ninth note here, which in this case is a B note. Now I've shown you this shape because it's very popular for funk, because you can actually slide this shape up like this and produce the sound a little bit like a brass section might sound. I'll show you with the band. And my little finger was just adding on a 13th note there as well. Now, let's just recap on the three chord shapes that I've just shown you. This is A minor seventh, root note on the sixth string, and A minor seventh, root note on the fifth string, and finally here's A ninth, root on the fifth string again, and that's the ninth note flashing there. Now the last thing I'm going to look at is playing funky riffs. You might have heard me playing a couple during this program. Now I'm still using notes from the blues scale, but this time, instead of just playing the notes straight, I'm actually dampening with my right hand. Now if you can see, I'm using the side of my right hand just on the bridge saddles to dampen the strings, and this produces quite a percussive sound. I'll add a bit of chorus, and listen. This right-hand damping is quite useful if you want to play funk riffs.
In funk, the central instrument is the bass guitar because it provides melody as well as rhythm. Let's look at the left hand. First of all, hammering on. Hold the first finger down firmly and then hammer on with the third finger. It sounds like this. You can do the same thing with the second finger. It sounds like this. And pulling off, which is using the third finger to pull off the string, and you can do the same thing with the second as well. Here's the first one. Second one. And finally, the third variation on that, which is called a fast trill. And here's a riff incorporating the fast trill. Another common feature of funk bass lines is the use of the octave, which looks like this. Now, the bass line is going to go E, and then a C sharp, which is the 6th, then D, which is the 7th, and then back to E, which is the root note again. And then I'm going to go and do a fast trill on a G note like this. It goes like this. 2, 3, 4. Now, the bass takes lines which are based on the blues scale. In E, that would be E, G, A, B, and D. I'm now going to play a riff just using the notes from the blues scale.
Up to now, Henry's been showing you what you can do with the left hand, but the bass technique crucial to funk is the slap, which is done with the right hand, and the man who turned the slap into a major funk style was Larry Graham.
Actually, it started with Sly and the Family Stone. Before then, there really was no thumping, plucking, or syncopated bass style because I was the one that started doing it. But it wasn't popular before the first hit record. And the first time I got to thump on one of his records was a tune called Dance to the Music. And I got a chance to thump like this. After that was a success, we went back in the studio and cut a song called Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself. It was kind of our way of thanking the people for that hit. And I got a chance to thump and plug, okay? And that was kind of like this. 1, 2, 3, Notice how the drum kind of like complements the bass lick. 3, 4. So we went back in the studio and I got a chance to thump one time on a song called Everyday People, where I thought I would try something new. I would just thump the whole song without really changing up any notes at all. And it was something like this. 3, Notice the rhythm is really being carried by the bass, and then the drum really complements that again, just like in the other song, like just bass. And then the drums complementing it. Now what Tony is playing is actually different than what was on the record, but because of his style of playing, it is still a compliment. 3, 4. And there you have it.
So how do you slap? Well, this is the secret. It comes from the thumb bone, the magical thumb bone. And what you do is you strike the string against the fingerboard and then move away, allowing the string to vibrate. Make sure that the movement is from the thumb and keep the wrist and forearm totally relaxed. You should hear a click followed by a clear bell-like tone. It would sound like this. Now, if you don't hear that tone, it could be a few reasons. One of them might be you're moving the wrist and forearm together and hitting the bass and deadening it, or you might be hitting the string and then not moving away quick enough. So a click like this. Now, the second part of the sound is to curl the first and second finger underneath the top string, like this, and then pluck away from the bass, making sure you don't move your hand away, like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. When you can do those two things, listen to bass drum patterns. Try and copy them with the thumb, like this. Now, once you've got the bass drum, see if you can add the snare. The pull goes on the snare beats. Listen carefully. Now, once you can do that, try and do a fast trill or a hammer-on with a snare beat like this. So if you want to get fancy and put the left hand together with the right, you could do something like this.
I was using a lot of funk in my music in the early 70s, started with my Headhunters album. I even called one of the songs Sly and dedicated it to Sly Stone. Now there's more Bootsy coming up, so don't go away. And if you want to learn more about funk or any of the other subjects in Rock School, keep watching. Rock School is offering a home study package that goes into a lot more detail than a half-hour TV program possibly can. And now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying,
Now, we've only given you a basic outline in a music that's really strong on rhythm and rich in texture. Now, at best, it should be great to listen to dance to, and to play. Now, all we can do is try and point you in the right direction for your own sound. But remember, it's not so much the technique that matters as the feel. So take it from Bootsy.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Join us tonight at 10 for Treemonisha, a feature of America's musical theater. It's a joyful, tuneful celebration by the king of ragtime, Scott Joplin. Be sure to join us tonight at 10 and hook up your tuner because Treemonisha will be simulcast in stereo by WBAI, community-sponsored radio at 99.5 FM. Now stay with us for a look at the rest of the evening and for the McNeil Lair News Hour.
Video cassettes and floppy disks.
Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This show proves that you don't have to be born in Jamaica to play reggae, because it's showing up everywhere. Reggae. Now, that's a bad groove. In the late 70s, reggae had already been around for over 10 years. At that time, my group and I decided to record our first reggae song. Actually, it was a new version of Cantaloupe Island, which is an old jazz tune of mine. Anyway, I remember that we took a lot of time to painstakingly work out every last detail, and finally, after about 2 or 3 days of recording and overdubbing and getting everything right where we wanted it, I took the tape home and I listened to it, and then I realized that I really didn't know enough about reggae. Anyway, I've learned a lot since then, and I've had the good fortune to sit in with people like Steel Pulse and to record an album with Sly and Robbie. But reggae is so special that there's always more to learn. This session of Rock School with Sly Dunbar, Robbie Shakespeare, and Dennis Bovell is one of the best introductions to reggae that I've ever seen. It starts with a group that definitely knows reggae, Jamaica's Black Uhuru.
So I a deep plastic smile shower. So I a deep, I said a deep shower. The mommy came from a foreign land with a whole lot of Babylon. Now you gonna love Babylon, girl. You got to prove the lie on. Don't show I a deep plastic smile shower. Oh, don't show I a deep, I said a deep shower.
That was top international reggae band Black Uhuru. In recent years, reggae has become one of the most influential and popular forms of music.
When rock musicians in this country first tried to play reggae in the early 70s, they found it really confusing, because reggae coming from Jamaica rather than from North America, it seemed a million miles from the rock and the blues styles that they'd grown up with.
The unusual thing about reggae is the rhythm and the way the instruments lock together to create that rhythm. Now, the main part of the sound is the drums.
Characteristic heavy bass weaves around the drums and holds the rhythm down.
The guitar chops on beats 2 and 4 of the bar.
So, how come the sound is so different? Well, the roots, of course, go way back in Jamaican history. We're looking at more recent times. In the 50s, Jamaican bands used to play a thing called mento, which is quite close to Trinidadian calypso. And the roots of reggae can sort of start there when this local homegrown sort of music started to be blended with American imported jazz and soul and R&B, which led to the invention of ska. That turned into rocksteady, and then we had reggae.
So, over the past 20 years, the music has been continuously developing, and now there's a thriving British reggae scene as well. But now we're going to look at the instrumental techniques, starting with the drums.
The thing that really characterises reggae drumming is that it usually has a half-time feel. So, in all the other styles of drumming we looked at, the snare drum comes on beats 2 and 4, so you get this sort of rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now, in reggae, the rhythm's halved. So the snare drum comes down on beat 3, right in the middle of the 2 and 4. The 2 and 4 are transferred onto the hi-hat, and are beefed up by the guitar, so you get this sort of sound. A 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right, the other interesting thing is that the bass drum drops on beat 3 with the snare drum, right? And the snare drum itself is usually played with a rim click, like this. So you get this sound, again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, now this is called a one-drop. And it's this that, when it first came along in the late 60s, early 70s, really confused rock drummers, because there's no first beat to the bar on the bass drum, which gives you the solidness of the time. It sort of floats around. It sounds like it's upside down almost. So it's quite tricky to do. And because also there isn't this first beat of the bar on the bass drum, very often it's pointed up by a little rack on the snare drum, or a sharp beat on the hi-hat like that. And the other thing you can do is syncopate it, and you can use our old friend the clave rhythm like this sort of, and so on. Now the other thing is, we've just played all that in straight eights, and as with the other rhythms that we've seen previously, you can have a triplets feel, so you can get the and so on. So the next little bit we're going to do is a triplets feel one drop. I'm going to stick these little things in I was just talking about, and this is really the style that Carlton Barrett of the Wailers made his own. Okay, 2. Now, in the mid-70s, reggae got slower, it got heavier, it got more political, and new styles emerged, known variously as rockers, militant style, and this involved playing foot-of-the-bar steppers on the bass drum. But the snare drum stays firmly fixed on the third beat again, so we've still got the half-time sort of feel. And this, by the way, is where Sly Dunbar really starts to make his mark. He's this acknowledged master of modern reggae rhythms. So we try this one. Right, and as the 70s closed, reggae had now become international, and reggae drummers started to get influenced by rock and funk. So what happened was the bass drum was freed from playing four to the bar and started to syncopate around the beat a little bit more. And you get this sort of style. Well, the way I see it, the space afforded by a whole decade of reggae drummers playing half-time has put a whole new perspective on rock and funk rhythms. And so it's led to reggae drumming, I think, becoming perhaps the most influential area in modern drumming over the last few years. And the man who is really responsible for leading that change with his rock-solid and deceptively simple style is Sly Dunbar.
There may be a couple thousand rhythm patterns you could play by any song. So we have to choose which one is right for the song. So, for instance, if a singer sings something like Art Made of Stone, and he sings that, Art Made of Stone, I could play Art Made of Stone. You wouldn't let me know, but it wouldn't flow with the vocal that much, you know. So I was thinking of playing Art Made of Stone. Made of stone. But that's a beat that's used regular, very regular, right? So I said, no, I want something different for this song, right? So what they were playing, and I said, all right, I can try something. Turn the other way around. So I made of stone. Same beat, but playing one on that and playing it on the snare, the same thing. But you get different accent, different drum fall, and different notes, and they sound different.
After the drums, the bass is probably the most crucial instrument in reggae. It has a very difficult job to do. It's got to fit in with the drums, sometimes holding the beat back, sometimes pushing it forward. We asked Dennis Bevell to explain.
Say the beat's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Then the bass might go of a timing of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. You know, really behind the beat, almost dragging it back. Right? Those have been the most popular. But you know, you can play almost anything.
To talk about reggae bass, you've got to start with the sound, and that's really deep and bassy. Now, Jamaican music has always emphasised bass because reggae was originally recorded music which was then played on sound systems outside at big dances and events. Now, the DJs found that by turning the bass controls up to full, they could stun the audience. They've kept the bass thing really heavy ever since then. So, a big, deep sound. Now, the other thing to remember is Jeff was talking about one drops, and they emphasise the third beat. Now, when you play a bass line, think in 2-bar patterns and phrase to the third beat in the second bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Here's a pattern that does that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, once you've got an idea for the phrasing, try missing out the first beat. Here's a pattern missing out an 8th note. Now, once you've missed out a bit of a beat, let's try missing out the whole of the first beat. Try a quarter beat rest. Now, another idea that you might try is to take a simple funk pattern, play it funky, then simplify it, play more laid back behind the beat, and it turns into reggae. Obviously the drums and the guitar have got to change, of course. Something like this. Now, these are some simple bass line ideas in reggae. Now, the top bass player in reggae today is Robbie Shakespeare. He's probably played on more hit records than any other bass player in Jamaica. We asked him what sort of things he might try on One Drop and Steppers.
Well, you have a whole heap of different style. Like, you have a style like One Drop, you call it like ska, chick, 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 like have the bass bumming around more, right? And the drum will just keep a steady, steady beat, right? And you have like a next style now, would be like, a slide would play, the drum can play like pop, right? And when the drum play that, carry the bass would now, after foot drum, yeah, carry the beat now. So the top would be well furnished and the bottom would have your feet moving. The top can do anything.
Now, it's not only the rhythms you play, it's the notes you play as well. Because reggae bassists tend to play phrases that create tension, And that sounds great with the up in the air feel of the rhythm. One way of doing that is to emphasize the fifth of a chord. I'm going to play a pattern that I played before, but you'll notice that the fifth is emphasized more. It's A going to E, and this will be played over an A minor chord. It's like this. Now, the idea of phrasing to a fifth of a chord has appeared in calypso and mento. You hear phrases like this. Now, if you take the same bass line, play it a lot slower, and with a laid-back feel, you get something like reggae. Now, you don't just have to play it in the major key, you can play in the minor key as well. So this example is going to use A minor and E minor. I'm going to emphasize the third beat of each bar, and I'm going to phrase to the fifth of each chord.
Now comes the role of the guitar in reggae. Just listen to this for a moment. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that was like a crossover between American R&B and early ska. There was a guitarist called Ernest Ranglin who actually began skanking on the offbeat. And even though reggae music today is a lot slower, you've still got that distinctive guitar chop rhythm. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, it's like on the second and fourth beat of the bar, where the snare drum would usually be in rock music. Now, to get that sound, we're going to use the technique that we looked at in funk last week, which involves left-hand damping. If you remember, you actually fret the chord and then bring your fingers up quickly so they rest on the strings, and this cuts the sound off short, so like this. You can also use a double stroke like this. Or sometimes you can get a really percussive sound by just resting your hand on the strings, the left hand, so that you don't hear any of the note sounds at all, like this. So there's several variations, but the chord sequences tend to be quite simple. Songs often consist of just, 2 or 3 chords. Now, another feature of reggae guitar is when you play very heavily dampened melodic riffs. And when I say dampened this time, I mean the right-hand damping that we looked at in funk last week. Now, these phrases are very similar to the bass line, but they're a little bit more elaborate. And this is a style that was particularly used in rocksteady and things like that. Guitar solo in reggae, the important thing is to keep it simple and melodic. I'm going to do a guitar solo now using mainly the blues scale and adding in a couple of extra notes to try and get the most melodic sound that I can. Influential aspect of reggae is dub. In the 60s, records were made where the B-sides were instrumental versions of the A-side. The vocals were largely dubbed out. Now, these proved to be really popular, and with the advent of multi-track recording in Jamaica, they began to make very complex dub mixes tracks were dropped in and out, and they were treated with echo and lots of other effects. Now, musicians have actually begun to imitate these studio techniques, and this has led into a whole completely new area on its own. We asked Dennis Bovell to explain about live dub techniques.
Somewhere along is this. You variate, you know, just deviate, right, from the beat and play something quite outside the beat, but within the tempo. Right, so it's... and then back. Right. You know, sort of just play something alien to what's happening, but not for too long, just long enough to make it sweet. The bass would be doing anything he wanted to do for any amount of time. He'd given himself time to do it in, to get back into the mainstream of the music, right? Can you imagine sort of going against the tide one time in a river that's going the other way for a little while and then going back with the tide, right? So say the bass line was like this. Right? And you might even go or something, you know, and then back to... Well, first of all, say you had an ordinary two-chord pattern, right? The tune was just bubbling in two chords, right? From there, there, right? Now, keeping that in mind, right? I'd get out of that time and go. But all that is within... right? In the case of... oh, you know... slow it down and bring... but all within... right? To give the illusion of sort of doing that.
Dennis was mostly playing triplets, sort of... slowing them down, speeding them up to imitate the effect of tape echo. Now obviously that can be quite tricky to do, so the best way to start working on your dub is just to drop the instruments in and out every couple of bars or so, and then when you can get a bit more adventurous and start to copy these tape effects as you get going. But the main thing is to keep the feel of the beat in mind all the time, whatever you're doing.
So I hope you can see that the basics of reggae aren't so mysterious after all. There's a certain flexibility in the music which gives players great scope for development. Reggae is not just music, it's an attitude of mind. There's a sense of working together, and all musicians can benefit from understanding about it.
Oh, hi, I was just taking notes. Stay tuned to Rock School and you'll see Dennis Bovell in the studio creating a dub right before your eyes. And if you'd like to know a lot more about reggae, keep watching. And you'll find out how to get a home study package that goes into much greater detail than a half-hour program can. So now, for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying, I want to be a reggae star.
UK dub master Dennis Bovell, dubbing up a storm.
I got the guitar now, right? Echo the snare. Back in the guitar. Try a bit of reverb on it. Reverb.
The McNeil Lair News Hour is next. Then at 8:30, join us for The Tripods, a story of the future when Earth is ruled by aliens and only a handful of freedom fighters resist mind control and slavery. That's The Tripods tonight at 8:30.
Wait! Rock School's...
Hi, my name is Herbie Hancock, and this is Rock School. Rock School is the 8-part series that shows you how blues, heavy metal, funk, reggae, and new music are made and played. This show is designed to keep you from falling into a rut as it looks into the future. This is the 8th and the last show of the series, and now that you've learned a whole lot of rules, it's time to start breaking them. As our Rock School advisors, Deirdre, Henry, and Jeff will demonstrate, there are no real boundaries in music anymore. Recently, I recorded a song you may have heard called Rocket. On that one song, you're hearing rock, jazz, blues, funk, there's dance music, African and even traditional Japanese sounds in a way that nobody, not even I, could have imagined as recently as 5 years ago. So just because the series is coming to an end, it doesn't mean that the whole story has been told. The story is ongoing. And I hope everybody watching Rock School will stay with it wherever it may lead. On this show, the real stars are the Rock School House Band, who managed to put everything you've seen to date into perspective. But you'll also be treated to the Police, Susie and the Banshees, and the Gang of Four. Hold on tight, cause here comes the future.
Hello, welcome to Rock School. As this is the last programme in the present series, we're going to look at some of the ideas that we've looked in earlier programmes, see how you can expand on them to create new sounds, and maybe take your playing in new directions.
Did you hear how we were able to change the entire feel of our theme tune just by altering the rhythm? Another thing we did was we swapped roles, the guitar and bass. The bass played a melody line, which is sort of lead, and the guitar kept a sort of harmonic role.
It's only by bands taking a more experimental approach to music that you can come up with new ideas. Another popular thing is to actually combine different elements from different styles to produce a crossover style. We're going to be looking at both these ideas in this programme.
You'll know by now that most of rock is played in 4/4 time. The beats, the bars divided into quarter beats, 8th beats, 16th beats and so on, and it's by mixing combinations of these on different parts of the kit that you come up with drum rhythms. Problem is, it's very easy to get into a rut as a rock drummer. You end up playing 8 to the bar like this. And so on, you end up playing that on every song almost. You can get out of that rut by playing 4 to the bar on the hi-hat, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, so on. Or you can play 16s on the hi-hat. But perhaps a more interesting thing to do is to play on the and of every beat. What I mean by that is to go 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and so on. By doing that, In fact, we saw a bit of that in the funk program, because by doing that, it lifts the beat. Also, what happens is that it gives you a bit more space to change your snare drum and your bass drum patterns. So you can get rhythms like this one. Now, by breaking up the straightforward continuity, the beat like that, obviously it affects what the other instruments play. Here's Carl Palmer talking about just that point.
You hear things now coming from drummers which sound, say, something like this. You hear patterns, sort of like not a normal jazz funk pattern, but something which you hear like this one. That's quite involved, really, because you can't hear a constant offbeat. I'm almost playing like the bass player would play, and the bass player in that particular case would have to be holding it down.
Now, the other alternative is to play a more complicated sort of compound rhythm on the hi-hat. You sometimes hear this in reggae feels like this one.
On the guitar, you have the same rhythmic possibilities as the drums. You can take a bar and divide into quarter notes, eighth notes, or 16th notes, and use this as the basis for a rhythm part. So if you had a 4/4 beat going on like this, so 1, 2, 3, 4, you could actually divide the bar into two, just play 2 strokes to bar like a reggae thing, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You could divide the bar into quarter beats, play 4 strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Double it up again, divide the bar into 8th notes, play something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If we take it up again, you get 16th notes. This will give you a much more funky rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4.
The next aspect of rhythm is syncopation. This, as you remember, is just accenting odd beats within the bar. And the commonest syncopation in rock that we've been going on and on about throughout the series is the Latin clave rhythm. And this really is at the root of so many rhythms and syncopations in rock, played on all the different instruments, all the different parts of the drum kit. It's like a magic key to rock rhythms. Now, here it is again. It's dead simple. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and this is again played in a different sort of rock feel. This time it starts off on the bass drum, and the other instruments play with that. And then at the end of this little bit we're going to play, we play it as unison accents, like this.
Another way you can divide up the bar, which we've talked about in the series before, is to superimpose 3 beats over the basic pulse. you can fit over 1 beat or 2 beats. Now 3 over 1 basic pulse sounds like this. It's called a triplet. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Now a triplet played over 2 beats sounds like this. Now all the instruments can play triplets right across the board, and you get it from slow blues to reggae. In the next example, I'm going to start off by playing a triplet figure, and then Jeff's going to be playing triplets on the hi-hat, and then Deirdre's going to do a triplet fill on guitar.
So we can see that the ingredients of rock rhythm are 4/4 time, syncopation, which is based on the Cuban clave, and the triplet. Now we're going to move on and look at melody. And the elements which make up rock melody are the major and minor scales and the blues scale, which we've been mentioning throughout this series. Of course, if you play the scales in the same way all the time, you'd soon get pretty bored and you'd sound pretty boring as well.
Now there's lots of different ways that you can play basic scales, and that'll give you great ideas for solos as well as bass lines. Now first of all, let's look at the major triad and the minor triad. Well, the major triad contains a root, a third and a fifth. Now you can jazz this up by mixing the notes around and adding rhythm. But what you should do is try and find out where the rest of the notes are. Well, there's a first inversion, it's like this. Third, fifth, eighth. There's a second inversion, which is fifth, eighth, and 10th. And you can go down with that. Now you can do that with the minor chord as well, like this. Root, minor third, fifth, minor third, fifth, eighth, fifth, eighth, minor 10th. And going down. Now all you have to do is add a bit of rhythm to those and you can play them all over the guitar. Now let's have a look at a scale, the blues scale. Start at the top, this is in E minor by the way, and play the first 4 notes like this. And then go back to the second note and play 4 notes from there. And then the same thing again from here. And you can do that going up and going down. It sounds like this.
And these exercises are really good for the guitar as well. Now, so far in this series, we've been looking mainly at the conventional roles of the guitar, bass and drums. But as we already said, musicians are constantly moving outside the conventions to create new ideas. Now, you often find that rhythm and melody is becoming increasingly blurred on all the instruments. We talked to Andy Gill and Sarah Lee of the Gang of Four.
Many kind of rock things are a lead guitar and chord structure with the bass and drums applying the basic drive at the bottom end, and I think we tend to put things on a level so that the guitar and drums and bass are all up there together interacting.
It's using the drum kit as well in a way that's not as a standard drum kit, in a way that working out the parts, thinking about the different drums and what effect you can achieve with each individual drum, rather than just setting up a 4/4 regular beat. Taking each drum actually individually and working out a part for it.
Okay, back to the drums. You'll notice in that clip there's no hi-hat pattern at all in the drum rhythm. So you don't have to play in the conventional way, you see. In fact, you can extend that idea a bit further and play a drum riff, maybe like this one. 1, 2, 3. All I was doing then was just playing single strokes, one hand after the other, but by placing it on different parts of the kit, you get an interesting syncopated rhythm. I was just going so on. Now, here's Budgie with Susie and the Banshees doing a similar sort of thing and getting quite an odd rhythm. Notice the way the snare drum and the hi-hat comes out of the beat. Notice in that one also he was using beaters. That's another good idea for getting a different sound. Right, by playing drum riffs across the drums, you get a more African influenced sound as opposed to the Latin sort of rhythms that we were talking about at the beginning of the programme. Bands like Adam and the Ants and Bow Wow Wow have been doing really well using that sort of idea in recent years. And the other thing about it is that it really brings the drums to the fore, which is, you know, surprise, surprise, that's in keeping with the role of drums in African music. And the other thing is that, again, it must affect what the other instruments play, so it changes the sound of your band drastically. Right, so here's another African-inspired rock rhythm with a slightly different technique. In this one, each hand plays a different rhythm, which is very simple, actually, but when they're all stuck together, you get quite a nice feel. I'll come clean and tell you this one comes from Ginger Baker, who's been doing this sort of stuff really well for years. So you start with this one, you lead with the left foot, and you just play a very simple shuffle on the feet like this, and you go.
Now with the drums to the fore, the guitar can take a slightly more background role. In that last piece, I was doing a sort of textural sound. Now, a good way of doing this is to use harmonics together to form a chord made up all of harmonics, like this. Or here. You can change the pitch of the notes using the tremolo arm, like this. And if you use a volume pedal, you can always make the guitar sound a bit like a keyboard because you're losing the attack usually associated with the guitar. So it sounds like this. Now we're going to look at a new way of playing melodic lines, which combines rhythmic qualities as well. Now if you're playing a chord sequence, quite simple ones, for example, E minor to D. One idea would be just to pick out the notes contained in the chords, and that way you can make up a rhythmic and melodic part at the same time. You could try something like this, something very simple. I'm going to play an idea at the band now, and I'm going to add in some extra notes. I'm still going to use the chords of E minor and D, but I'm going to play some open strings, but I'm still basing it around the idea of just working around the chord shapes.
moving on now from guitar to bass, the idea of bass playing lead has become very common in recent years, especially with players like Stanley Clarke, John Entwistle and Mick Karn. Now, what you may not realise is it's possible to play chords, harmony and melody all at the same time. Try this. Play an open string, but use the notes in a scale and flick off like this. Now there are 4 strings, so you can do that on every single one. Another idea you can try is to play 2 notes at the same time, or even 3. Now in the next piece of music, I'm going to incorporate some of those ideas.
1 and 2 and 3.
In that piece of music, the bass is taking the lead. Another thing you can try is to mix up musical styles. In that piece, we mixed up funk with country.
The history of rock music, in fact, is always a history of the mixing of different styles and different cultures. But rock being a very fast medium, sometimes that's done superficially. The only thing you can say about is that, well, if it leads to greater communication, greater understanding and so on, all the better. But as we've seen in earlier programmes, the really important developments in music, these are not superficial, they're very powerful because they got very deep roots. So as we saw with the blues, this is a mix of African and European cultures going back centuries, reggae, a mixture of West Indian and American cultures. And it's no accident either that the most successful rock stars, from Elvis through the Beatles to David Bowie, they all show very original fusings of different cultures. Now, here's an early clip of the Police showing how, when they started off, they very cleverly mixed rock and reggae together.
Every time people start thinking that music has reached its limits, along comes someone like the Police, or Prince, or maybe someday you, to push back the limits a little further. Stick around for more Rock School. And if you're really serious about learning to play, stay tuned, and you'll find out how to get a fantastic home study package that expands upon this entire 8-part series. And now for Rock School, this is Herbie Hancock saying, "The band plays on."
See if you can spot some of the influences on the different instruments.
1, 2...
Wait! Rock School's not over. If you're really serious about rock and roll, there's more. The Rock School Professional Package. A complete home study kit that goes further than Rock School can on TV. You get the Rock School book. A complete